So, good afternoon. This is welcome to this session of our symposium here at San Jose State, where we're very happy to be. And this is a sort of executive session of faculty and staff, administrators, and the title of the session is intentionally sort of insights out. Can we talk? Can we talk to each other? Can we figure out? Can we be absolutely candid with each other about the situation with protest on college and university campuses and its future? It's still early in the academic year. So far, so good, I would say, most places. But I'm very honored to be in a dialogue with Carol Christ, who is a legendary leader in higher education, I must say. She and I first met when she was president of Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts, and I was president of Goucher College in Baltimore, and we were on the board of the AAC&U together when we were beginning to deal with some interesting and complicated issues. And of course, your own Cynthia Teniente-Matson, who has been just the most gracious host possible for this conference at San Jose State. And it's just there's some wonderful contrasts here. I mean, Dr. Chris stepped down as chancellor, of Berkeley at the end of June. Cynthia has been here at SJSU for a year and a half. Is that right? So different systems, a veteran, a newcomer at this institution, and an opportunity to think aloud about what lies ahead. I'm going to follow the usual format of asking a question or two at the beginning, and then I hope the three of us and many of you will participate in this dialogue lasting about an hour and a quarter. And my first question is I'm going to be directed to Carol, because I want to give her an opportunity to say what she feels she learned that was most important about handling issues of protest, issues of free speech, of uncomfortable free speech sometimes, on university and college campuses, if you don't mind, Carol.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I think the most important thing I learned is how important communication is in multiple directions. Communication with your external constituencies, so they both have the opportunity to hear from you what's going on and what strategy you're taking in relationship to it. But equally important, communication with the protesters, communication with your internal constituencies, that so much of this is about not only whatever is the particular demonstration or protest, whatever the issue is, but also about how universities should comport themselves, and people have widely different views about that. So I think the most important thing that I learned over and over again is the importance of communication to different audiences that can have dramatically different views of what the right thing to do is.
And of course, President Teniente-Matson, you're not exactly, you may be a new face at San Jose State University, but you're not a newcomer to this business by any means. And so I wonder if there's something that you have come to regard as very important to your practice and your understanding of how to lead in difficult moments. Not just, I mean, we're so accustomed to talking about difficult times, And certainly this country is in a difficult time. But in difficult moments, and when you have to think so quickly, that was something that I found one of the most challenging parts of being the leader of even a very small liberal arts college, was how to think before I said something that I would regret.
Well, we always have to do that.
That's true.
To the point of your question, about maybe a couple years ago now, the time goes by quick, I was moderating a panel for ASCU, American Association of State Colleges and Universities. And the topic was around Father Hesburgh from Notre Dame. And there had been a documentary, there is a documentary, I think it's on Netflix, but it might be on Prime, I don't remember. And I downloaded the video, and it's like everybody else, we're all, sort of crammed for time. So I had my notes, and I decided, and I had been some prep work, and decided to watch the full video. So it was the talk was about just snippets. I watched the full video, and I got off the plane feeling refreshed, reset, inspired. And the reason for that, to your point, is it was a reminder that our country has been here before. And so watching and reflecting on Father Hesburgh, whether I agreed with everything he did or didn't do, and whether those practices would hold up today, reminds all of us as leaders that others have come before us in some of these spaces. Now, maybe not everything around AI, like we were talking about earlier, but in terms of leadership controversies, every moment is an opportunity to refresh who we are as leaders, how we think about our role as leaders, and the significance, as you suggested, Chancellor, of communication, but how we lead. And how we lead during the most difficult of times is complexity that requires us to go back to who we are as human beings, what are our core values, and then around that in our own leadership team here at San Jose State, bringing all of the right voices into the room so that we're hearing from everyone. And the right voice isn't always about hierarchy. The right voice may be opposing thoughts, someone who has a minority opinion or a dissenting opinion, to hear from everyone so that you yourself stayed balanced. It's much easier said than done in practice, because when you're in it, you're in the vortex. And so trying to keep yourself mentally prepared is significant. And that's why I think about that documentary with Father Hesburgh and the enormous complexities that he faced in his leadership for a prolonged period of time.
Yes, he did. Do you have a hero, Carol, in this business? Do you have somebody that you think had figured all this out and had unique success?
Well, I have many heroes and heroines, but I think that you can take so many leadership lessons from so many people. I just finished reading a wonderful book about Bill Bowen, for example, who has been a hero of mine. But I think both the culture of each institution and the circumstances of an issue, even when it's the same political issue across multiple institutions, are different. And you have to be sensitive to and recognize that difference and find the solution that's right for your institution and this particular set of circumstances.
But I think to your point, sometimes when you're in the heat of the moment, it's helpful to call someone, speak to others who are not in
That's
that
right.
scenario, to say, this is happening. Don't forget, don't get hijacked. The psychological hijacking that can occur in those moments. I look to somebody like Dr. Ruth Simmons, who I have greatly admired. I know you both led the same institution.
Yeah.
She is a tremendous leader, a role model. I have lots. I don't want to start naming names, but to the first question, the reason I mentioned Father Hesburgh, I want to be clear, is I just thought those tensions were so similar to the tensions that we're in today, and how that leadership style worked during that time helps to remind us that there's people that have come before us in these same lanes and people that will come after us in these same lanes, to think about the decision making in that broader context.
Right. Well, one of the points that's been very much on my mind, it's now 10 years since I left being a college president and have had a little more time theoretically to chill out and reflect about some of these things, is that what struck me last spring in particular, but it probably started during the fall semester, is that in many places, thankfully not at Georgetown where I now work, but in many places, the protests, and they were particularly related to the Middle East, but there was a basket of issues that could arise at the same time, that I noticed that the sides, and there were often more than two sides, demonstrated, spoke, yelled, acted as if they only did it louder and longer, more annoyingly, more persistently, the other side would give in and they would win. And all it took was fighting this one battle continuously. And of course, that is such anathema to some of us of a certain generation that one of my personal missions, I think, now is to try to say what's important is that we can talk. We can talk even if we should be able to talk, even if we disagree profoundly on certain issues. And that seems to be diminished in many places, and I don't know what either of you might think about how to get that back, or am I just being hopelessly naive about my own earlier times, which is a serious possibility.
Yeah, I think we have so much work to do in building the capacity for dialogue. I agree that the tenor of protests has changed, but it's changed in other ways too. That protests more often than not in my history in higher education have been students against the administration. This particular set of protests, student against student, faculty member against faculty member, staff member against staff member, and people felt with such intensity the rightness of their position
Yes.
that it seemed existential to them. If you didn't acknowledge in some way what they were often not saying but shouting, you were denying some essential element of their identity. So I think we have a huge amount to do in terms of building the capacity for dialogue, but we also, I think, have to think about the unique features of this particular set of protests we've been through.
My experience talking to students here at San Jose State has really around these complicated issues, not everything. This set of issues that we're talking about, protests, and particularly around the Middle East, seem to be centered around a great sense of despair from students, hopelessness, grief, lack of ability to say something or do something that is going to change what they perceive is happening, whatever that might be. And that sense of, I don't know how much of this is impacted by the pandemic and the development that occurred or didn't occur during that time, and where those individuals are in their life cycle of human development and student development, confronting issues that are controversial within themselves, perhaps differing opinions within their own household, within their own family, within their own lineage, process of information. And what I experienced at San Jose State afterwards, not during the moment, was looking at the array of just incredible programs that our faculty have put together, our centers, our institutes, our departments, our colleges, and whether a student engaged in those services or experiences that would have been an intentional way for them to process this, whatever they're feeling or confronting, isn't easy. It isn't easy for the student to find their way through all of these pathways. So it's something that I've been focused on here on our own campus with what I was calling, or what I am calling, the future of humanity and civic engagement, to bring all of the incredible programming, including programs like this for us here today, that how do we learn together to be able to impact and affect change that's positive for students who in many circumstances I think are trying to make sense of it. They're fundamental sense making, and then figuring out what to do once they make sense of that in what actions they take.
Right.
And
Well,
you
I
know,
think this turnout today is absolutely wonderful. I mean, you have a very large number of San Jose State people here today, so there must be an eagerness to talk about these things. I'm sorry, Carol, you were about to say.
Hey, I just wanted to say how profound I think your point is. I think I had a sense that there is this sense of despair and helplessness among many of our students. They see something happening in the world that they feel is wrong, and they feel they have no way of having an impact on it. So what do? They turn to their universities. I've been amazed at the importance of statements and the way in which students want to negotiate every single word and comma of a statement as a sign of that sense of impotence.
And another thing you said, Cynthia, that I think is important is the post-pandemic aspect of all this, because in my experience, a bit more on the sidelines, really a lot of students' lives were shut down much more than we even realized during I mean, imagine starting college and not meeting a single faculty member, which was true of many students around the country, except by Zoom or online in some fashion.
Yeah, you're in a world in which for, a year and a half, even 2 years, you're forced to define your identity only by your most immediate tribe, your family, and online. And certainly it's been my observation at Berkeley that students have lost a lot of their social capacities.
I think that's exactly right. I think that conversation is not as natural, not as comfortable around some things, and so then when it explodes, when there's something really big, there's not a sort of
coping mechanism.
Right, not a normality to fall back upon.
Yeah, and the students often seem to me very fragile, in even at their most acting out.
That is certainly true. So, how do we deal with this before or in the early stages of another round, which is liable to start any time, and not just on the Middle East, but on climate issues and on some of the issues in the presidential campaign, some of the astonishing issues in the presidential campaign. What do you have ideas about how to mobilize these communities full of very bright people to be nicer to each other?
Well, I don't know if it's about niceness, although certainly we would like people to be kind.
Kind is a better word.
Kind and well, I'm using it metaphorically like you. But I think for us as a community, as a university community, it's the importance of sort of reflecting on what we learned. We need to do more tabletops. We need to practice. We need to practice scenarios that may occur with outcomes that we would have maybe not seen before or haven't seen in a while, or and are prepared for that in a way that holds true to our values. So I think how do we prepare, or how do we think about this? Part of it is tabletop exercises. Part of it is understanding what do faculty need, what do staff need that support students or that teach students and engage with students to be prepared in these cases, in these sets of circumstances ahead of time? How can we create spaces for students to learn to express themselves, to learn to invite difference, and understand that difference doesn't make someone else a bad person or wrong. It's just different. And I think as subject matter experts in whatever our areas of expertise are, this may cause discomfort in not feeling prepared to be able to manage that within this complicated set of circumstances. I think the rhetoric that is going on at national and global level
Right.
doesn't help, because it doesn't role model the kind of behavior that we would want to see on our own university campuses. And so those are also areas where we have an opportunity in our classrooms to describe what is appropriate behavior. How do we engage in inappropriate discourse? How do we, again, role play or role model things that they maybe should have learned earlier, but now they can learn and engage in here with new and engaging faculty and content and subject matter experts.
I think there's so many things that we need to do. Just name a few. First of all, it's really important to figure out who your leadership team is going to be for protest issues, and make sure that they've gelled as a group. Because when things happen, if you don't have that leadership team together, you can act impulsively, rashly, unwisely, not bring others with you. Then the kind of things that you do for students seem to me depend very much on how large and what kind of institution you are. When I was at Smith, we could bring everybody in the community inside of one auditorium. There are things that you could do at Smith with 2,000 students that at Berkeley, with 45,000 students, you simply can't do. And so you need to have multiple points of entry for students to start developing the capacity for dialogue, to begin to provide learning opportunities for students. And it's really important in either instance to equip faculty to handle situations that might happen in their classrooms. And then finally, we have to do so much talking to our communities, external to the university, because people need to understand how we're thinking about these issues and have the opportunity to ask us questions and hear from us.
Well, you remind me of a quote from Maya Angelou, do the best you can until you know better, and when you know better, do better. I think we spent our summer trying to know better so that we could do better. So to your point, and for our team, we have a group called the Deciders that are looking at a lot more events and activities, again, content neutral. Just how do we think about space reservations, what's occurring in those spaces, what else might occur should there be a disruption, how do we facilitate and support having a safe environment and safe campus always. So we have trained, I think, within our leadership, a small group of people that are in the decision-making process, lots of different scenarios, as you suggest. Thinking about that, then how do you escalate? And once you escalate, what happens after that escalation? So we have spent more time, at least at the senior leadership level, doing that. Perhaps we need to do that at other levels, to your point about scale and size. I was also at a smaller to medium-sized campus, and it's easier when you can call everybody in the room, when you can talk to all the student leaders at the same time. That's not so much the case in a campus like yours, and certainly a campus like San Jose State. We are, I think, activating many of everybody's a thought leader in terms of faculty and staff that are engaging with students. And so the sort of see something, say something also applies, that when we see leaders that we know we should be talking with, try to understand what is on their mind, what are issues that we can work together on to be proactive, preventative where possible, requires a lot more energy on top of all of the normal work that we do as a university organization and as a public society.
I wonder how each of you might feel about this common controversy over whether people who want to protest something need to declare their intention in advance, need to almost not get permission to do it, but alert the authorities that this is going to happen, and so that the authorities, so-called, will be better prepared, at least theoretically.
I don't think that would stand a snowball's chance in hell at Berkeley. You have to have good enough communication with student groups so that you hear about the protests.
I agree. What we've tried to do is in our reservation systems. So I'm sure you have the same thing at Berkeley. You know, there's rooms, there's spaces, there's public venues and the like. We have to have order. We maintain order. You know, it works 99.9% of the time. That spaces are reserved. The name of the organization, probably the topic of what they're going to be doing, presenting on, fairly routine university sort of stuff.
So in effect, you do tend to know in advance what's coming.
Most of the time, but not always. I realize this goes against how some people are thinking these days, but I think protesting is a really valuable part of the college experience for students, and I believe in time, place, and manner rules. We all have them, but not trying to constrain what students do as long as they're not disrupting university business.
Well, that's the key condition. As long as education can proceed, research can proceed, the essential functions of a university or a college can go forward. And I think that's something that is missing for students. I, of course, remember the Vietnam era, and when I was still in college, early in the heated time during the Vietnam era, and the teach-ins were, I mean, looked at today, it seems sort of charmingly simple and peaceful and productive, those teach-ins, because people really put tremendous effort into it, and they listened to each other, and they were in big lecture rooms and talked things through.
Though I think it's important not to idealize the 60s. That did indeed go on, but there was also a lot of violence in the 60s.
Oh, sure there was. Oh, it evolved into very, very tough time. One other thing I just want to mention, and I want to go to questions from the people in attendance. At Georgetown, there's frequent review of the so-called speech and expression policy. Almost every year, I think, as far as I can tell, and adjustments of those commas and what have you about how to change it. And we have a practice now at Georgetown. Whenever there's going to be an event that could, a forum or a panel, and of course we live on those at Georgetown because there's so many people who want to come and talk in Washington and all that. There's, at the beginning, there's a representative of the Speech and Expression Committee or a designated person who reads a statement about the university's policy on disruption and violence and disturbance, and says that anybody who doesn't accept this and who acts in a contrary way will be warned once, and then if it happens again, that person will be escorted out of the event. And to my amazement, it seems to work, at least in many circumstances. I just wonder what you think about that. How feasible is that?
Well, I don't think it's impractical. We at San Jose State have gone through more effort, perhaps more so than other campuses, to ensure that students acknowledge that they understand there's time, place, and manner or activism and advocacy policies and practices in place. and that we ask them to acknowledge that they know that there are policies and that they have some understanding of the guidelines. Again, it's not an approval process, to Carol's point, or alert the authorities, sort of. But if you understand, you might be more inclined to understand the rewards of participating as well as the risks of adverse behaviors or actions that may be contrary to the policy. And you do that intentionally and knowingly. So to your point, I think a practice like that is not impractical. I think it can work. When people want to be disruptive, they will find a way to be disruptive. That's will be common practice.
Yeah, we also read such a statement at the beginning of many of our events, but it doesn't end the motivation to disrupt events.
I'm sure that's right. But it's just heartbreaking to see police coming into college campuses and
yeah, I think it's always a bad day at a university or college campus when you have to call on the police to restrain students in any way.
so that's I hope we don't see a lot of examples of that. Are there some questions? I think we're not going to use a complicated process. Just pass microphones around and. Selah, do you want to? Be sure to use the microphone like an ice cream cone. Is that
Hi.
Anne Marie?
Hi, thank you so much. This has been a really great conversation. I'm Ellen Middaugh. I am faculty member in Child and Adolescent Development and Interim Associate Dean for the College of Education. So my research is on youth civic engagement and social media. And so I was really stricken by this concept of students feeling that this is an existential matter. In my classes, I tend to have students who are of more similar background. And so we study like online dialogue, talk about productive dialogue. But when you put students in dialogue with each other where they are talking about existential issues, so for gender expansive youth or youth who have lost relatives in a conflict, it is actually existential. And so I'm really curious about kind of your experiences with more campus dialogues and what's been productive and not productive.
Experience this year is going to show. The Office of the President of the University of California did quite a wonderful thing. They made available a significant amount of money to each of the University of California campuses for programs that would counter bias and discrimination and increase the capacity for dialogue. And we decided at Berkeley to do a call for proposals, and we got hundreds of proposals. We chose what we thought were the best ones. They're often fairly small in scope, but I'm hoping at a big campus this strategy of letting 1,000 flowers bloom and let the community start to try to solve the problem. And these were proposals from students, proposals from staff, proposals from faculty, will help begin to embed a different set of standards in the campus, or a different set of norms and values in the campus. So I'm hoping that works. I also think that there is an important role that's played by modeling, so we can model dialogue across difference for our students, and I think that's helpful.
I think you're absolutely right about visible role models and how we role model behavior that we expect to see. Some of what we did last fall, I think to the point of your question, Ellen, in the Division of Student Affairs in particular, and I'm sure there's other places too around the campus that this occurred, but in some of those groups where we were able to, at the time the Vice President for Student Affairs or the AVP for Student Affairs and some of our student involvement teams met with students, listened one-on-one, were able to provide not only just a listening ear, but resources, responses, helping process the dialogue, to your point. so that there was some constructiveness, but also for us to hear more firsthand what was being experienced and what else did we need to do that could scale up responses to students, especially across community. I think some of the examples that you offered in your question about bringing students together in your class around very specific topics always is helpful, especially when they have a trained person like yourself that's helping them process what that information is like. May not occur in every college. Every discipline may not lend itself to that sort of conversation, but the like-mindedness from the students is also where they feel that ability to express themselves perhaps more openly. So I think we have a couple of pockets of that. I know in athletics, which is another area where we have, large groups of students, there were facilitated conversations there as well to help process controversial topics or controversial issues that were of significance to them, or just issues in which they wanted to have dialogue about. So I think those practices work everywhere when we can scale them across. And it's one of the things we should think about in our Center for Faculty Development, about are we providing all of the appropriate resources and professional development opportunities for faculty themselves to work together with their department chairs or their deans to help create the roadmap for that type of contextual conversation that's appropriate in their spaces.
Right.
Is this on? Can you hear me? Okay. My name is Ryan Scannell. I'm not going to stand up because I don't want to put my head in front of the camera. I am a member of the English department. I study rhetoric, and in particular, I study political rhetoric, demagoguery, fascism, like all the fun things. And one of the so the question that I wanted to ask is about a paradox that I think about a lot, but that I think came up in your comments. On the one hand, you mentioned students feeling like they are despairing and they don't have agency to act on important things in the world. On the other hand, often the way that we think about helping them do that is through appropriate ways to engage and good dialogue and all of those sorts of things. But the examples of effective political movements in the last 20 years have been inappropriate, profoundly, sometimes violently inappropriate. And so I'm wondering if either or all of you would talk about a little bit about what it means to balance, on the one hand, what we see as effective but inappropriate with what we see as, or at least what students may see as ineffective but following the rules or appropriate to what they're being allowed to do.
That's a really wonderful question. Somebody asked me a question that your question reminds me of in the middle of this protest. It made a generalization saying they thought student protests ultimately, if you look through history, were on the side of justice. And did I agree with that? And I thought that was really, really an intriguing question. And on the one hand, it's our responsibility to protect, as Sandy was saying, the research and instruction of the university. But I also think this is an enormously, I mean, you all know this because you're all part of a university community. Young people of the age many of our students are in such a generative portion of their lives in which they are really trying to figure out, how can I make the world better? And trying to help them figure out what is that balance between activities that might be disruptive and activities that are genuinely constructive and produce change. That's hard. So I guess I'm really not answering your question, except to say that I think you put your finger on something that's really important. If you think of the big moments of social change, most of them have a disruptive element to them, even though that's not ultimately the way in which change has happened.
My observation has been that, to your point about agency in what's effective or not effective, I think students or people are looking for negotiated settlements of some sort, something that would demonstrate that they were heard, that they could see some visible difference in whatever that behavior might look like. So I think, again, if you can have that one-on-one conversation so you can hear and really hear through whatever anger might be to get to the root cause, then I find that you could find some generalities on what can we do to display or demonstrate change or demonstrate a commitment without taking down somebody else or another position, so to speak. And obviously, that's where it's hard. And I understand your point about justice. And I certainly think that's part of it. That's what my observation is what they're looking for, right? It's a great point that you make, is how do you provide justice? And sometimes justice isn't immediate. It is part of the tangible, the process, the tangible evidentiary support that it's a progression. It's a progression of activity that will have its moment in time where we can point to the change, the significant change that they're looking for, particularly when it's outside of our control, to be able to manifest the change that they're looking for.
Ryan, I have a minor point to add to this, I think. I teach just one small seminar now to first semester freshmen, who are my favorite people to teach. And I think it's very important to try to coax out gentle, civil disagreement with each other from those students in the classroom, because that's a safe place to disagree. It should be a safe place to disagree, and especially with a small group. It's a place to practice disagreeing and avoid overstatement, perhaps, or absurd comments. And so I always try teach a class just once a week, 2.5 hours, and if the students are not disagreeing with each other by the third week, I'm worried.
I also think we need to do some more talking about civil disobedience, because
Yes.
civil disobedience means you choose to disobey some law, but then you take the consequences for it. And I think we're in this weird place right now where students want to disobey, but they also want amnesty, and that isn't what civil disobedience is.
They want amnesty in advance.
Exactly. I said to some people on our leadership team, you're asking for something that a federal judge can't grant. So certainly I can't grant that sort of.
Right.
There will be no consequences.
John, you had a question right there.
One back there.
Hi, I'm Tammy Vizentiner. I'm a...
Could you move the microphone closer to your mouth, please?
I'm not doing the ice cream thing, am I? Very well, yeah. I am an associate professor of science education, so I'm in teacher education in the College of Education and in the College of Science. And so, I don't know if I'm going to articulate this question well, but I guess I just want to bring this down to like a human level of safety. You mentioned safety and belonging. I wrote a piece on this, and so one might be wondering, I teach secondary science methods, so I teach future middle and high school science teachers in the methods course. And I wrote about my experience navigating the October 7th onward with those students. And I think a lot about being a white professor in a minority-serving institution and how, right, this is the one issue we're not supposed to talk about. It's just the unwritten rule. We all know this, right? And there's a lot of power in politics. We saw what happened when leadership across the, across the nation took stances or tried to do their best, right, and what happened to those people. And so I want to have, like, total compassion for all the layers here. But the thing I discovered, and so one of the things is, like, why would this even matter in science education at all? And I really try to be a model for my teachers, because I want them to go into classrooms and be responsive to the very linguistically, racially, socioeconomically diverse student populations that they're going to be serving. And so I was like, if I can't model this here, right, I'm not going to be able to, like, how can I expect them to model it? And there was a gap, right? There weren't statements coming out. And again, I have total compassion for why that is, and I don't understand, I don't know how it is to be in a position of leadership. But the thing I found is that there was a real need. The students were like seeing the atrocities happening on both sides, and then the really large atrocities that continued to happen in Palestine, right? And we're at a minority serving institution, and these students, you know, they needed to feel like they were seen, not just heard, but seen as humans. And so what came from these discussions, and so the reason I bring it up in science methods is not just to be a model, but also like, my stance is like, kids in school, if they don't feel safe, they're not gonna learn anything at all. I don't care what you're teaching them, right? And so when I opened this space, we had these really thoughtful discussions, and I will admit, as you know, was in a full body sweat, like many times, because I was like, who's gonna come out of the ceiling, and like, right? And so, so my sense of safety, right? And I also know I'm coming from a stance of privilege as a white person. And so I see how this impacted my colleagues of color who could not say a thing, right? It was not safe for them to do so. And my students, when I opened this space, what I realized, it wasn't just their idea of like what's happening across, they saw themselves, right? In the Palestinian struggle for freedom. And then there was that incident that happened on our campus with the speaker, and I don't know all the details, but I do know how that was taken up, right, on social media. I saw Twitter accounts calling our students savages and animals and like deport them and they don't belong here. And so what really resulted for me in this gap was like, whose life has value? That's the name of the piece I wrote. And it wasn't just about like what's happening abroad, but it's like, do I belong here? Am I safe here? And so I guess after that monologue, my question is, how do we create these humanizing spaces, right? Where we can, I was like, there wasn't a lot of dialogue. And yes, there were spaces that were opened up, but I didn't find those in my communities. I didn't find access to that. I didn't know how to navigate it. I felt like I was just winging it. And I also felt like at any point I could get an email from a student. In fact, I did get an email from a student at the end of the semester, after all, a white student, and the subject line was, it was something really, it was like feedback in lowercase. And I was like, oh boy. And we've all been there as professors, like, and it was like, thank you so much for opening this space. Thank you for having the courage to do that. And so the sentiment isn't like, oh, you're amazing because you did that. The sentiment is like, I want that more, right? If we can't have critical dialogue across differences, across these really sticky, messy, powered issues here, then where can we have them, right? And so anyway, that's my question.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was really moving, what you said. One of the things that has really puzzled me is that at least Berkeley last semester, students seemed almost hungry for dialogue in and community in the groups that represented them. So we had a professor who didn't think that the university, Jewish professor, who didn't think the university had done enough to protect the community from anti-Semitism. And he staged a sleep-in his office. And one of the things that was just remarkable about that is his office was filled with students from early in the morning until the point that he kicked them out at night. They were so hungry for dialogue. And I saw the same thing in the encampment, which was a very well-behaved, well-regulated encampment at Berkeley. The students seemed hungry for dialogue and for being seen. Where I don't think we've been successful is opening up some kind of dialogue between groups. Whenever I would try to offer it, I would get a, no, we're not ready for that. No, we don't want that. But that's what the next step has to be.
I agree 100%. So first of all, I read your piece. I remember when it came out because you spoke about what you had done in your class and making the spaces for that. When we've done that, what you've done, create a space that obviously worked, or at least from the N of one, the person who wrote you to say that it was effective, and I'm sure you felt it in the classroom. Those are areas that cannot necessarily be replicated at scale. So it was back to what Ellen asked over here as well, as what are you doing in your own classrooms, and how are we supporting you to feel prepared to take that leap, which is what you were talking about, to be brave enough to take that space in your own classroom. We've tried to do this with difference, as you suggest, and had the same result, that groups are willing to speak in a class or speak within an affinity, but not yet ready to come together in those lanes to have that dialogue. And I don't know that we know. I mean, I'd be curious if someone in the audience has had I know you have, Elena, have had some experience with this, in how we do this at scale to bring the difference across. But I agree with you. And maybe we aren't the right ones to be asking those questions because of our own power dynamic. But I know that we have asked those questions across our campuses. Elena, I don't know who has the mic. Stella has it. Can
Someone else.
Can Elena have it up here? Elena has some great work that she's doing.
Hi, should I stand or sit? Okay, hi.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Elena Klum, the director of the Center for Community Learning and Leadership and a faculty in clinical psychology. I've been at San Jose State for 25 years.
How do you like it so far?
Yeah, I think I'll stay. I decided I think I'll stay. So what I wanted to say is I'm getting really concerned right now about creating more binaries, more dichotomies, and false divisions. As soon as we assume that Euro-American faculty can simply be classified as white without intersectionality, and students of color can simply be classified as students of color who inherently identify as with Palestinians, that I want to say that my experience of students here is way more complex. So my experience talking to students a little bit about how they feel around this particular conflict, but how they feel about their own identities, affiliations, immigrant histories, intersectionalities is way more complex than the dichotomy that we might have created and reinforced inadvertently around specific issues. So as our president alluded to, what the Center for Community Learning and Leadership is supporting, you all received an email about it, and some of you have really taken it up. I really want to salute Professor Mary Curran Percival, who does some of the best civic engagement work anywhere, bar none, is this curriculum from the Constructive Dialogue Institute that comes out of their work on turning down the temperature on campus and teaching students critical dialogue skills regardless of the issue at hand. Not assuming that people can be reduced to complex categories, reduced to simple categories, and that they indeed have complex identities with complex thoughts and decisions that we don't understand just by looking at them. So I'm really hoping that people will look at this perspectives curriculum, work with myself and Dr. Mary Curran Percival around activities and community engagement and community involvement to take those skills and practice them with each other and across the country. Thank you.
Elena, can you repeat where they can find that information on your website, or is it an email to you?
So there was an email that came out from the Provost's office. It is on the Center for Community Learning and Leadership website, and you are welcome to contact us directly at the Center for Community Learning and Leadership, or me at elena.klaw@sjsu, and we will support you in implementing the Perspectives curriculum, which again allows students to discuss hot button issues without assuming that they take any particular position, because you don't know my positions by looking at me, and I don't know yours. And I hope that our students can get to know each other better, and we can as well. Thank you.
Well, I mean,
I
Elena, you
want to
touch
say,
on.
I'm sorry, I find that such an inspiring statement.
Thank you.
I think that's a wonderful direction to be thinking in. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
Cynthia.
you didn't. You didn't at all. I was going to say, Elena, I think, and I know you've spoken myself. I've come to visit your facility, and Kristen Dukes. I don't know if Kristen is here. She's over there, but I can't see her from here. I know Kristen has visited with you about this curriculum, or is working with you more about. I thought she was talking to you. You're nodding no, Kristen.
We spoke.
Okay,
we spoke
good.
once.
The significance of intersectionality is where I was going to go with this. Is you made an important point that perhaps we have not spoken of or drawn as articulately as you did, but the intersectionality and the complexity of identities certainly does not escape me by any stretch of the imagination. So thank you very much for bringing that back up to the forefront.
Good afternoon. Thank you for holding this, because my team has been asking so many questions about how we're going to handle this. My name is Shonda Goward. I'm the AVP for Undergraduate Advising and Success. And I also hold another position as the Network Director for the CSU Student Success Network. We've got 3 distinguished presidents, and I want to ask, how did you all prepare for these moments? I've got folks who tell me they don't even want to sit in my seat, never mind your seat, because they're scared of what's happened, right? They don't want to face dealing with protests and budgets and personnel. And so this is a room full of middle leaders, and we're doing the work. And how did you prepare for your seat so that we know if folks are aspiring to presidencies or my level of leadership or directorships, how we can tell our teams what they need to be doing so that it's not so scary, so that we have people in the pipeline who can continue to do this good work?
Well, of course, I led an institution where everybody knew everybody. It was small. It was 1,500 students when I was there. And so there was no avoiding talking to each other. That's very different from a much larger community like this. And I'm now at a larger place at Georgetown where I see, which has much more in common with your institutions than with where I used to be. I think it's very difficult, and I think it has to start with small groups of people who can have each other's confidence and then bring other people into the conversation. But I'd be interested in what both of you have to say about that.
Yeah, in terms of, how you prepare, I think everything in your probably lived experience, not just professional experience, in some way prepares you for these moments. Certainly at Berkeley, I've been at Berkeley about 40 years, and except for my time at Smith, and I had a lot of opportunities to observe protests and what worked in resolving them and what didn't work in resolving them. The police never work. It always works by negotiation. And I also think as leaders, we can do a lot to provide opportunities for the people in our communities that aspire to leadership positions to practice by leadership academies of various sorts, in which we propose real problems for the participants to work on, or and also by creating very self-consciously teams that are in place to deal with crises. I believe you'd never handle crisis by yourself. but always with a team of people that include members of every area of the university that's directly affected.
Shonda, I think, this idea of career progression starts with, just actually writing something down. This is what I aspire to do, or this is what I aspire to be in terms of professional job title or aspiration upwards. You're talking specifically about the presidency. There are several programs in higher education and in professional associations that allow for job shadowing, I think a real deep dive into the various aspects of being a university president or a university provost or a vice presidential level at any of the other disciplines in which there's vice presidents, so that, as you suggest, you have a chance to practice, drill down. A lot of those programs provide case studies. They provide examples. I mean, open the proverbial opening with your Chronicle of Higher Ed every day has examples of things that are going well, things that aren't going well, where you can really get a sense of, is this the kind of opportunity that I want to engage in, and really thoughtful talking, engaging with sponsors and others who can give you insights and advice. So I like your question, and I certainly in your role at the CSU Student Success Network, those are great opportunities to create these panel discussions or these opportunities for open conversation about what's it really like in these top leadership positions. Thank you for the question.
Hi, I'm Janet. I'm from the philosophy department. And I think the conversation about how do we scale is an interesting one, because what we're really talking about, how do we scale trust? And trust is fundamentally not about people engaging with an institution. It's about people engaging with other people. And so the challenge in big institutions like this one, and even in our classrooms that are getting bigger and bigger, is how do we keep prioritizing the one-on-one interpersonal engagements that let us build trust? And how in our professional lives do we not give up on someone after the first engagement? How do we find the optimism to keep trying to build trust after some initial missteps? So I guess I'd be interested to hear what the leaders on the stage think about strategies, even in suboptimal conditions like the ones in the real world, for continuing to reach for something that gets us in more one-on-one interpersonal relationships, rather than saying, I'm a cog in a big old machine.
What a good question. I think in part, this gets into an issue we didn't touch on at all, which is institutional neutrality. But I think in part, engendering trust requires authenticity on all of our parts. And so that's in part, it also requires being vulnerable, which is part of authenticity. So those are two of the things that I would say help to engender trust.
Do you want me to go? Well, I think the trust to me is more than just a one-on-one, although I understand that. We have personal trust when we have a best personal relationship where we can talk to each other one-on-one. That's not necessarily the case, as you're suggesting, for scale. But not everyone needs that same one-on-one touch point. It's certainly helpful if you can have it. So sometimes knowing that there is a community of learners or a community of thinkers or a community affinity where I can create that relationship and create that trust does work, but also understanding that when I need a one-on-one, I know where to go to get it. whether it's in my trusted circle of friends, professional colleagues, fellow students, if I live in the residence halls, my residential advisor and the like. We have many places where we have student peers, student peer networks and the like. So there's lots of touch points for trust or to building relationships with students which engender trust. I think the other part of your question is, what if you have a bad first experience? Something along those lines. How do you keep coming at it? I think some of that also starts with a direct conversation about why the first experience didn't go well. You know, what did you see or observe? What did you say or hear? And what are both sides of that, so you can get back to your fundamental point about the two-way dialogue. That's always the best way, but it's not always the most practical way given our size. But I do think we are a place that can make those one-on-one connections when known. And I think that's part of what I was talking about earlier on the guided pathway for students. When I think about the future of humanity and civic engagement, how do we create those touch points? Because we have programs all over if you find your way to them all.
I don't think I have anything to add. I do think trust is very, very important, however, and that we have to be working on it all the time. I think we have time for one or two more questions.
Hi, my name is, excuse me, just coughed right in the microphone. My name is A.J. Foss. I'm a professor of anthropology here, and I'm also the faculty advisor to Students for a Democratic Society. I have so many thoughts swirling around the discussion today, but I guess my main question has to do with our culture and the monuments we've built our institution around here. And by that I mean, one of the nicest encounters I've had in my 10 years at San Jose State University was overhearing, just passing a campus tour, and one of the student tour leaders referred to the Smith Carlos statue as the spiritual center of our campus. And I think that's true. And I know, even personally, that's a place that I've gone to in times of national crisis in my 10 years here. There's a monument of people who stood up for free speech in a way that was disruptive and unwelcome, and who met with consequences. Our other monuments include Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, and others who were disruptive in their exercise of protest, of free speech in the name of social justice. And I wonder how we make good on that, right, in our culture of San Jose State University. Is that something that's just sort of safely in the past for our students, but they come in here and they're writing their application letters for scholarships, right? What are you doing to make a difference in the world? What are you doing to be a world changer? We're actually showing them and demonstrating to them that that is our spiritual center as an institution. How do we make good on that, to, like, whether it's in a way, whether it's cultural or whether it's in a, real organizational development strategies that we do here to defend, encourage, protect those types of rights here on campus. I have tremendous amount of respect for Elena Claw and for Mary Kern Percival, but I mean, they can't carry it for us by themselves, right? So how do we do this as a total institution and as a culture, right? And I'm sure this is equally true in Berkeley and in Georgetown as well. How do we make good on that? Because that's the signal we're sending them, that's actually what we value and support, and that is our spiritual center. So how do we really make good on that in a substantive way?
Well, I do think we are making good on that through our spirit of advocacy and activism, and encouraging advocacy and activism. There is not a sense of suggesting to students that if they come to San Jose State that they shouldn't be engaged in that type of activity. It is part of the DNA, also to keep everyone safe and healthy, which were also part of those same individuals that you're referencing who are memorialized here in our institution. So I do think we're doing that in what we're doing. So I would love to talk with you more about where is that falling apart, or where is that fraying that we should be supporting. But everything we're putting in place is to support advocacy, activism, open dialogue, constructive dialogue, standing up for what's not right, expressing yourself, bringing forward those. Everything doesn't have to be brought forward, though, in a spirit of disagreement. Often I am in complete agreement when I talk to students about something that they find isn't right on the campus. I often say I can't solve a problem I don't know about. So when we're talking about those things, we can do that together. But I do think that culture of dignity, respect, and care for what the statutes symbolize in activism and advocacy is the core of our DNA and who we are, and that they've been integrated into our institutional values. I'm sure we can do more, but I think we're doing, I don't think it's fraught with problems.
Hi, everyone. I'm Samantha Sternstein. I'm a student assistant here for UMC. I think I'm the only student here, probably, but I'm here as an employee, not as like an outsider. But university marketing. Yes. So Instagram, TikTok, that kind of stuff. Anyway, my question to you all is: we as students have only really existed in a polarized political climate. Where and who do we look to as role models in this time?
Well, I look to leaders in whatever sphere they are who speak to my values, but also to the values of coming together as a community. I thought the most important question, your question raised me to the previous question, is we, and who are the we? And I look to leaders who have a very capacious definition of the we.
I have a number of people over time that I have admired, and as somebody said earlier, we're all shaped by these experiences and we change as we go along, but I look for people who understand forgiveness, and that in my life is a very important thing, and I'm proud to be able to forgive somebody for something that I think was wrong, who now recognizes, or even if he or she does not, that I think it's time to forgive. That's a very, very personal answer.
I always start with my family. So I take inspiration from that, from my parents. I take inspiration from a leadership lens of those people who are attempting to do good in the world. There is no one perfect person, and nobody leads a perfect life. So those people that you can point to that are doing things that are impactful and changing the world, I think really matter. And they don't all have to be alive. And, I was mentioning Father Hertzberg, that I'd watched this video. It gave me a whole different lens about leadership and how I think about my role in leadership. I never met Father Hertzberg. I think Madi met Father Hertzberg when she was at Notre Dame. I didn't, but it prompted a conversation for me with her about that. There's other people that I have admired from afar and people I admire from up close, like Dr. Ruth Simmons, who I was referencing earlier, this first African-American woman who's done so many great things. That brings me admiration and joy. It may not bring you admiration and joy or be someone you should look to. So part of this is your own self-definition of understanding what is of significance to you, what causes you to pause and say, wow, I want to be like that. Those are the things I want to do in the world.
I want to thank everybody for attending this session. I appreciate very much both of your